Welcome to the Word for Life podcast, a daily devotional covering the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation.
Numbers chapter 28 and 29. In these two chapters, God speaks about festivals and offerings to the people of Israel. You see, now these are the new generation of Israelites. They are about to enter Canaan. And before they set out on their journey to Canaan, God reminds them of the offerings that they need to bring to the Lord and the festivals they need to celebrate for the Lord. These were already mentioned to them, and when we read through the list of these sacrifices and festivals in these two chapters, we can note a few things. Number one, the Lord listed the offerings in a certain order. There were daily offerings, weekly offerings, monthly offerings, and yearly offerings. Chapter 28, verse 2 to 8 talks about daily offerings. Verses 9 to 10 talks about weekly offerings. Verse 11 to 15 talks about monthly offerings. Chapter 28, 16 to chapter 29, 38 talks about yearly offerings and festivals. Friends, what this tells us is that God gave them a plan for their religious spiritual life. There was a daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly plan. Friends, there are times when spontaneous worship is great. God visits His people with His presence in a random manner. There are times when we experience God's random visitation in our lives. But at the same time, worship and devotion to God can follow a rhythm. For example, our Lord Jesus, when He was on this earth, went to the synagogue as was His custom. There was a custom, there was a plan, and there was a rhythm in the life of Jesus. Similarly, for a believer, daily Bible reading, regular church attendance, and a planned manner of prayer can help a believer grow consistently in the Lord. Secondly, in these two chapters, the often repeated word is that these offerings are an aroma pleasing to the Lord. You see, God first gives them the correct procedures for each offering. And then He says, when these offerings are correctly presented to the Lord as prescribed by Him, then it becomes an aroma pleasing to the Lord. Friends, every believer desires to be a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Romans chapter 12 verse 1 talks about how believers can offer their bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to the Lord. And that will be true and proper worship. Therefore, sacrifices in the New Testament is about offering our bodies to the Lord. Not just offering our bodies to the Lord, but in a holy and pleasing manner. A believer who practices holiness to the Lord is following a correct procedure. His or her sacrifice becomes a proper worship to the Lord, and therefore it becomes a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Friends, even today, believers strive to correctly present themselves to the Lord so that they can become an aroma pleasing to the Lord. Thirdly, when the Lord talks about these offerings, He only wants the best. For example, Israelites will take lambs without defect to the Lord. And as verse 5 says, they will only bring finest flour, and also which is mixed with oil from pressed olives. That means pure oil. You see, by bringing the best offerings to the Lord, Israel will demonstrate to all the world that God is worthy of their best. Friends, believers always bring their best to the Lord. They strive with a spirit of excellence because their God deserves the best. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 22 to 24, Paul talks to Christian workers. In verse 22, he says, "Obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters." Friends, believers at their workplace or in their ministry always strive with a spirit of excellence because their God deserves the best offerings. Finally, when we read these two chapters, we might wonder if God is asking too much. There are these daily offerings, weekly offerings, monthly offerings, and yearly offerings. Will these offerings be a burden to the people of Israel? Now we must remember that the original Israelites might not have thought this way. When God asked them so many offerings, they would have only thought about how much they are going to receive in the land of Canaan. Because the land which the Lord will give them is going to be bountiful and plentiful land. In Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 10 to 12 we read, "When the Lord your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, to give you a land with large, flourishing cities you did not build, houses filled with all kinds of good things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant. Then when you eat and are satisfied." Friends, God gave them a prosperous and blessed land. And that is why these offerings and sacrifices will never be a burden to the Israelites. Friends, God never asks us what we cannot give. He first blesses us from His bounty and then requires us to offer to Him. In 1 John chapter 5 verse 3 we read, "In fact, this is love for God, to keep His commands, and His commands are not burdensome." Friends, these chapters talks about daily, weekly, monthly and yearly offerings and sacrifices. Israelites were called to plan their worship and their devotion to God. And not just that, by correctly offering their sacrifices in the right manner, they will be a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And by giving their best to the Lord from the bountiful blessings that God had already given them, they will serve their God and rejoice in His presence. Even today, a believer finds joy in giving himself or herself to the Lord. And that is not a burden, that is a joy.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you tomorrow for the next episode of the Word for Life podcast.